Going back to J.K. Rowling's first novel, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Harry Potter, as an infant, was left at the doorsteps of his relatives, non-magician relatives, for the reason that they knew what powers Harry possesses and that they wanted him to live as a normal person away from the wizarding world. However, as the story continues, Harry wasn't kept away from the wizarding world as planned and eventually was even enrolled in Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where he developed his values, camaraderie, determination, and even interest in sports. In conclusion, Harry's good qualities such as his values, traits, and interest in sports were not just inborn or inherited from his parents, but rather results from his interaction with people. This is because even if he wasn't able to adapt his parents' traits as he was growing up, he was still able to adapt and shape his own character through the values and traits of the people around him as he passes his life stages: childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. In reality, these life stages are important in developing values, ideas, norms, and ambitions that can eventually help them to become a competent member of the society. Which connects us to our topic, enculturation and socialization. In relation to Harry Potter, he had also gone through enculturation, which led him into shaping his traits and values. But what is enculturation? Talcott Parson, a sociologist, stated that every birth of new generation of children are just like recurring barbarian invasions. He said that like barbarians, infants at birth do not possess any culture yet because technically they have not yet adapted any language of their culture, no moralities, and they don't even have their own perception in life. Just like barbarians who are uncultured, uncivilized, and unsocialized persons. And in order for infants to live and cope with the cultural context of our world, he needs to undergo a process called enculturation or socialization. In 1948, Herskovits defined enculturation as a process of socialization and maintenance of the norms of one's indigenous culture, such as ideas, concepts, and salient values. In better words, enculturation is a process wherein people gradually adapt culture, values, and norms of one's group through interacting with their surroundings. It also includes learning the cultural characteristics such as language and tradition, along with their cultural requirements. According to Herskovits, there are two phases of enculturation, the unconscious stage and the conscious stage. The unconscious stage are the early years of human growth where individuals unconsciously acquire their culture. For example, a baby copies the language or words their parents speak. While trying to communicate their needs to their parents on a daily basis, they eventually learned and adapted their parents' language unconsciously. Meanwhile, the conscious stage are the later years of human life where innovations are initiated by individuals. After years of acquiring knowledge regarding their culture, a man already has his own ability to reflect, internalize, and practice the values that he had learned for him to be competent. In relation to this, Grunland and Mayers explained that the enculturation process has two major aspects, the informal aspect and the formal aspect. Informal, also known as child training, wherein adaptation of culture, traits, and values are carried out by families and friends. Meanwhile, formal is most commonly called as education, wherein acquiring knowledge regarding culture is done in learning or sacred institutions, like schools and churches. Through the socialization, every individual develops a sense of identity that gives them the ability to think and decide for his own actions. Generally, identity relates to what an individual firmly stands for, believes in, and what is meaningful for them. It may be classified as gender, sexual orientation, nationality, or even social class. According to Giddens, there are two types of identity, social identity and the self-identity. Social identity are the characteristics that other people attribute to an individual. Social identity serves as markers that represent who an individual is. It is how people who don't personally know you identify you, see you, or label you. As an example, people may see you as a Christian, as a homeless, student, a teacher, a father, a feminist, or a public servant, maybe a doctor. Then that is your social identity. Social identity also manifests that you are identical with other persons or that you belong to a certain group. Since you all have the same characteristics like having common interests, objectives, experiences, or belonging to the same social class. Meanwhile, if social identity identifies you to be identical with other people, your self-identity does the opposite. Self-identity refers to the process of self-development where an individual formulates a unique sense of ourself and his relationship to the world around him. It is the process wherein an individual shapes and creates his own unique characteristics which defines who they are. Growing up in a Filipino community, you must have already heard a lot of Filipino values and norms more than 1,000 times. Respect your parents, use po at opo when talking to elders, and don't talk when your mouth is full. These are only few of the Filipino values and norms that we usually hear. Growing up, we were taught to follow and conform because otherwise we will have to face consequences by our parents. On the other hand, we were also taught to conform norms because this is the appropriate behavior that the society demands. Every culture or group has their own values to hold on to. They all have a certain language that they speak, symbols they respect, and norms they follow along with beliefs and expectations that they have for each other. In every phase of our life, from entering a college course, starting a new job, to attending a funeral, or even in weddings, there are always expectations that are being held. These are only few examples of norms. According to Hughes, norms are social rules that specify appropriate and inappropriate behavior given in situations. In other words, norms dictate people what they should do and must do, including what they should not and must not do. Although restricting, Mashon stated that the main purpose of norms is to set rules and expectations to guide and shape the behaviors of its members. For example, students are told not to cheat on exams. This does not only teach children to be honest, but it also teaches them to study for themselves and not be dependent to their classmates. If norms dictate what one should do and not do, Mashon stated that values, on the other hand, are statements of what ought to be. Schaeffer defines cultural values as collective conceptions of what is considered good, desirable, and proper, including what is bad, undesirable, and improper. Values represent what people in a given culture see as desirable, as well as what they find important and morally right or wrong. A great example is how our society encourages and expects students to study hard so that in the future they would be able to pay back their parents who sacrificed to help them afford education. This conveys how our society highly values education, that parents work hard and sacrifice just to be able to send their children to college. In conclusion, this shows how norms and values play an important role in shaping how members of a culture behave within their surroundings. Through conforming and practicing the provided values and norms of our society, eventually this shall reflect the characteristics of the whole society, which in result help us create our own identity.